nobody like this. You ain't seen nobody like this. You hear my sound all over town singing. Whoa. You ain't seen nobody like this. You ain't seen nobody like this. You hear my sound all over town singing. Whoa. I think there's something in the water. If you wanna take a sip, but be careful what you wish for. The faint of heart can't handle it. Everybody wants a piece of someone else's prize, but it ain't free, it don't come cheap. Only the strongest will survive. You ain't seen nobody like this.
Good evening and welcome to what I think is a special edition of San Antonio Soccer Roundtable here. I'll be the host. We have Rafa, we have Coach Lori Lee, we have Coach Hector Cano, and we have Kartik Krishnaiyer on the show tonight. We're not really going to talk something about San Antonio soccer. It's going to be more about how, what I labeled it, the health of the game. Talking about the abuse within, main focus is the NWSL from, this fall. And, unfortunately, there was a recent story, here in San Antonio of, unfortunately, a youth soccer coach abusing players as well. So, unfortunately, it's a tough topic, but I do believe that I have some great individuals to kind of discuss this from various experiences. We'll start with the introductions. Rafa, how are you? I know you're on the show all the time here, so no special introduction for you, but how have you been?
Pretty good. Just enjoyed back from the Thanksgiving holiday, so nice and sort of rest up.
So the family was good?
Yeah, so we had a pretty good, decent Thanksgiving, so it was all right. Lots of turkey.
That's good. Coach Cano, how are you? Coach Cano is the Director of Sports Performance and Athletic Mindset, Director of Soccer, and the head women's soccer coach at St. Mary's Hall, who is already in season. Saw that they've had a couple of games already under the belt, and is also host of the 50/50 podcast, which is a great podcast that covers soccer in Texas. And in my opinion, kind of focuses more on the coaching aspect and the administration side, for that here. So, Coach Cano, welcome back. I know this is fourth or fifth time that you've been on the show here, or maybe even more than that, because I think we did that much in the playoffs last year. But welcome back.
Thank you for having me. I like to think I have season tickets here on the SA Soccer Roundtable. Right? Appreciate you guys having me. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. And then Coach Lori Lee of Harlan Hawks, and also I believe a coach and board member of San Antonio Surf here in San Antonio, an academy team. And one of the cool things that I discovered looking, researching about Coach Lee. One, she played locally here at Reagan High School as a goalkeeper. But more important, after she, finished college, she came back and helped start a program at Somerset High School, which, went from one team to, I think you mentioned nearly 50 girls, before you transitioned over to Harlan.
Mm-hmm.
So welcome here, Coach Lee. Thank you for joining. I know this is kind of your topic that we reached out to you to kind of talk about, the start of high school soccer. And you mentioned that this is a topic that, you'd like to kind of get out in the open a little bit more, and it's something that we hadn't discussed in detail at that. So thank you for the conversation tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I think I have a different perspective because I've been a player. I mean, soccer's been a part of my life since I was 6, and now it's part of my daughter's life. And so I'm a player, I'm a coach, I ref too, and then now I'm a board member. So it's kind of a little bit different because I'm on that leadership side. It's so what can I do from my perspective to change this game and fix some of these problems that we have?
And then last but not least, Kartik Krishnaiyer, who is a soccer journalist and does so many other things here, but he is author of Soccer Wars, Inside America's Soccer Feud between MLS, NASL, USL back in the day. I believe he worked in the NASL front office. He's worked with the Fort Lauderdale Strikers. I think also Miami FC or the Miami FC. Pardon me. Get that correct.
You've got that down.
Get that correct. And also does lots of lower league soccer. I forget I know it started with a P. I think it was PASL there.
PASL,
in
done stuff in NPSL before as well.
So, but he is also senior writer for World Soccer Talk, which is a great podcast. I recommend it to anybody. They talk about more of the media's role in the game. And the reason why I wanted to have him on is one, his experience with league front offices and dealing with United States Soccer Federation, but also just, his role with the media and along those lines here. Because let's be honest, with this topic, the media and, USSF have to be part of the equation in order to fix the system here. Let's be honest with that. Any opening thoughts that you guys have, that you want to kick off with before we go into, the scandals of the abuse within NWSL and then what the conversations from there?
I think for me personally, it's become so apparent that this is such a systemic issue. This is not just an NWSL problem.
Correct.
And it's like brought up for me, like personally, a lot of things that I dealt with as a player. Like I haven't thought about in years, but I'm like, I've experienced things like that before. And the fact that it's like so common, it feels like almost, that doesn't sit well with me. And like now as a parent and as a leader, and like my daughter just started playing soccer, I don't want her to have to experience those things as well. So I think having conversations like how do we get to that endpoint where this isn't as prominent as an issue, where you don't have 5 out of 10 coaches being fired for misconduct in 1 year in a league, where does that start and how does that filter down to the youth systems as well?
And I think for me, and I put this in my notes, I have kids. My daughter doesn't play soccer, but she does other things. But for me as a parent, I have to change my mentality of how I was coached and how what I thought was acceptable as a coach at that time in the 80s and 90s. 90s as far as when I played high school and wasn't a star athlete or anything like that. But how I was coached to what's acceptable today. And I think that's for me as a parent, when I see AJ plays at the surf complex as well, when I see the interactions between player and coach and how they coach is different than how my expectations or my memory is. So I think that's why I want to have this discussion, and I'm going to be probably more just kind of sitting in the back and letting you guys talk, just because I'm the one that's probably the target audience on this, because I need to learn on, hey, things to look out for, for my kids to, to be able to do that as a parent, of a kid that plays soccer. And really this goes beyond all other sports here, but the main thing that we're going to be talking about has to do with, NWSL. And I thought that Alex Aziz wrote on Her Turf, a great on Her Turf on NBC Sports, a great timeline of, unfortunately, how this topic really came out, with allegations against Rory Dames, who's the latest one, Chicago Red Stars, and Paul Riley, who was head coach of the North Carolina Courage and Portland Thorn, and about the abuse of power and how the system failed. Because Coach Riley was allowed to go from Portland quietly out the door to was it a WPSL to North Carolina Courage, and there are no checks and balances on that here. So to me, and I'll start with you, Kartik here, just kind of looking real top level here, what's wrong with the current system when it comes to, the lack of guidance or lack of monitoring by the federation, and the major leagues on this?
Yeah, it's very apparent that there's been a systemic problem for years now. Now, when you talk about Paul Riley specifically, he was flagged several years ago, got the job with Western New York with the Flash, and the team was relocated. Steve Malik bought the team and was relocated to the Raleigh-Durham area. And my understanding is that he was vetted again by the new ownership in North Carolina in 2017 when they relocated the team and Malik bought that team. And this stuff was somehow not disclosed by U.S. Soccer or by NWSL, which at the time was being run by Jeff Plush, I believe. That was before Amanda Duffy took over. Was not disclosed to the North Carolina ownership, and that they found this out much later, which you can believe that if you want to believe that. But there are so many other cases beyond Paul Riley, right? That was the tip of the iceberg. The Washington Spirit have somehow persevered through all of this to win a title, but they are a club that has had all kinds of problems in terms of abusive behavior, bullying, sexual harassment, all of these sorts of things. And when you think about this, more than half the teams in NWSL have been impacted by this. And as Lori said, it's not just an NWSL problem. I mean, the thing that was really interesting for me this season is when I first started hearing grumblings about some of this stuff, I said, that's exactly what I've heard from parents and from administrators at the ECNL level. Same sort of things going on at the youth level. And it's filtered its way up to the professional. I mean, maybe it started at the professional level and filtered its way down. Either way, it's at both the youth level and the professional level. And U.S. club soccer has a problem with this culture as well. And we have coaches in this country, and I even did my own kind of apology saying that, hey, when it happens on the women's side and on the girls' side, I've been very concerned and said it's bullying or harassment. But I used to accept coaches' explanations on the men's side because it happens on the men's side too. Them telling me, well, this player is soft or this player doesn't have the right mentality. And now in hindsight, I realize it really was much of the same thing, where you have a culture, a systemic culture. Now, why won't U.S. Soccer do anything about it? Or why have they not to this point? U.S. Soccer is an incredibly political organization, and the elite youth soccer clubs have there are effectively two entities controlling U.S. Soccer: elite youth soccer clubs and Major League Soccer. And then you could say Wasserman, the Wasserman agency, which is connected to MLS in its own way. So you have these entities, and it's not in their self-interest to blow the whistle on anyone. So we get to this point. The other thing I would mention is, and this is something that's come up the last couple of weeks since everything. Now it's been over a month since the Paul Riley thing came out, and then the Washington situation was dealt with, et cetera. That USL is coming into the women's space, and with USL coming in, obviously they're firing the W League back up, which they've had in the past. But once they launch the S League, there's some thinking that maybe that's the only way you can deal with it is, and I'm not necessarily advocating for USL here, but what I am saying is that there are a lot of people saying maybe that's the only way you make the clean break from the systemic culture of abuse and bullying and harassment being covered up. Because the thing about NWSL is NWSL, much like Major League Soccer, is a single entity league that also with Lisa Baird, we're much more concerned about going out and getting whatever sponsorship. And she did a great job for the league in terms of getting corporate sponsors in the door for them. But either she was made unaware of the situation or she simply didn't care because the pressure was on her to bring corporate sponsors through the door. And I mean, we thought NWSL at the beginning of this year, we're thinking NWSL is the greatest success story in U.S. soccer because of how many corporate sponsors they're bringing in, their TV deal with CBS. They didn't seem to have all of the political issues that MLS had. Well, now 9 months later, we realize they're really not very different than MLS, as it turns out.
I was watching the final game this week on ESPN, and the commissioner for the USLW League, in talking about that league, made a point to say it is safe for players. And so I thought that was kind of interesting because it's almost like everything that's been going on with NWSL seems to make it out that there has been some ongoing safety issues. With the Royer Dame story, apparently USF did know. Krista Press went to Sunil Gulati and said, there's issues here, and was basically told that's just coaching.
Yeah.
And then you see on Twitter all these parents and players who played for Rory James at the youth level be like, yeah, he was awful.
It wasn't just that, Lori. It was that after that, there was a concerted effort by people who were allies of the leadership at U.S. Soccer to badmouth, to effectively slander Kristen Press.
Yeah,
and
she got forced traded where a place she didn't want to go, and she hasn't been back in the NWSL. She went to England.
Right, and then she went to Sweden first, right? Remember, for
Sweden,
half a season. Yeah, because of all of this, and the effort was made to say, well, maybe she's not, and because for me, I don't. We're talking about this issue specifically, but I do want to say, for me, she's probably our most versatile frontline player at the national team level, right? She could play if you're playing in a 4-3-3, she could play centrally in place of Alex Morgan. She could play either wing, and she has an ability to tuck into midfield that a lot of our attacking players haven't had through the years. So it was always very natural to me, even if she's not starting, she's on the national team. But because of all of this, now in hindsight, we realize why she was dropped. When Jill Ellis at times said, well, she's between clubs, we're not going to pick her. She's not playing regularly, or she got to Sweden, as we said, for 6 months. Now in hindsight, I realize it was all political. So even the selections for the U.S. women's national team were being based on this, which is just shocking when you think about it.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the issue here, right? I know Kartik just mentioned it, is really getting out the obvious message here is that it's that no one is safe, right? Whether you're talking from a U6, U8, all the way up to professionals, right? At the most senior level, as Kartik just mentioned. And it's funny too, is as these stories continue to come out, you're seeing, active athletes and former athletes, retired athletes of all ages that are saying it's like, oh my God, yes, I experienced something like that too. I saw something like that too, but it was the norm, right? And I think part of the issue here, I think, as we have this discussion today, is to not make sure that we focus so much on just the symptom or symptoms, right? But addressing it as a whole. Because I think for me, the biggest issue is that I don't think is being mentioned enough is the obvious one of the lack of transparency, but also the clear-cut separation and independence of the organization. We know when the NWSL was first created that this go around, what was going to make them different was the support of the U.S. Soccer Federation, right, and the payment of contracts and what have you. But as we're finding out, that wasn't necessarily a great idea in itself. So how do we separate these entities, right? Whether it's USSF, the NWSL, we look at it, the ECNL, and its impact and its influence across all of youth soccer, but also then these gatekeepers, right? These quote unquote identified gatekeepers who, at the end of the day, despite all these organizations across soccer in this country, it comes down to what seems like a handful of individuals. So, and I think those, more than just the organizations, those names of those individuals is what has to come to be put under the spotlight, if you will.
And I know with Rory James, with his stuff coming out, it was brought up quite known that he was very much a gatekeeper in Chicago area, and that players were told explicitly that if they wanted to even be looked at, that they had to play for Rory Dames, and that he had massive control of just having ECNL teams in Chicago fall under his organization and under his leadership. So it's like these select few individuals have all this power. And when it comes down, abuse is about power. Who has the power? As a coach, it's all about your intent. Are you intending to empower your players? Is your intent to assert power over your players? And there's too many coaches out. There's too many of these coaches that have been coming up now that seem to have these positions of power that were also asserting their power over their players in very coercive and very damaging ways.
So, which kind of is going to transition kind of to the second phase, since we've kind of identified, hey, what the problem is. But we've got 3 coaches on here, and Kartik's been involved in the leagues and clubs running them here. What does the role of, not necessarily the coach of the team, but for instance, Rafa was telling me about an incident where he saw abuse by another coach to his club, along those lines here. So what's kind of the role of the coaches and administrators, maybe not dealing with your specific club or along those lines, but if you see it, or if Danielle was here, if she was refereeing, what does the role, or what can coaches do to maybe to try to help curb this issue? And I'll start with you, Rafa, here for that here, so for that.
I think the role, I guess, being coaches is keeping accountability with one another, regardless if it's our club or another club. And like you mentioned about the situation, it was actually during a game that happened, and a coach was basically singling out a player that we knew they used to play for us, and they had a little argument, and it was just back and forth. And I actually had to intervene, kind of pull that player away to kind of calm him down, but even tell the coach to say, hey, you don't need to be doing this in front of everybody, this and that, take it, privately or something, or discuss it with the parents. I think if us as the coaching community, we do need to hold each other accountable. And if there's any situations, we do need to tell, whether it's board of directors with a club or even in high school, talking to the principals or school board members, say, hey, this is what's going on, and we don't need to tolerate this. We're here for the players. Is that safety for the players the best for them. We don't need to have this around, and especially for for this sport or any other sport. So what I like to see is a little bit more of that accountability, but also the coaches kind of policing kind of little one another to prevent some of these from this stuff from happening and to continue on. So that way we can have the right coaches for those players that need to be there, to be there on the field. They're basically educating those, the kids and so forth.
And I'm curious, Lori, from your perspective, I guess, from your perspective as a, I guess, board member, are there any that you're aware of existing policies or procedures in place to either help prevent or help report this on the club side, whether it be your club or others that you're aware of? Are there any procedures in place right now for this?
So we have like our policies, and we do training with our coaches. We use safe sport training, but safe sport, I don't feel like it really addresses some of these issues, and really it's more for, for grooming behavior, for sexual harassment, for sexual assault, to report coaches for that, not so much for this emotional and verbal abuse. So like as a club, like as a board, if something like that occurs, we want to remain kind of independent of this, and we do use outside resources to conduct those investigations. I think that's something that has to be done. It can't be within house. It has to be done independently. And I think that kind of showed with what happened with Paul Riley and some of the others. It was kind of in-house, and we kind of pushed it aside and we investigated. We're just going to slide this under the table. I don't personally know of any way to like necessarily report a coach if I see something, besides like if it's right there in the game, interfering with the referee possibly. If I was refereeing and I knew a coach and I hear that stuff, I'm going to step in and like, that's enough, and give them a warning. And if it continues, I'll throw that coach out. But there's not really, and that's kind of something I want to know. And like what I want to push for, can we get a system in place? Is this something that because there are coaches that I know go from one club to the other, get removed for their behavior because they don't have they have their way that they speak to players is just totally out of balance and totally off the wall, not appropriate. It's not sexually inappropriate, but it's just emotionally inappropriate behavior, but they just bounce around. And so they just continue to get hired at these positions. And I don't know if there's a system really to track that yet. And that's something that has to be established by these higher levels in organizations like STISA.
Laurie,
Right,
do you think like STISA maybe needs to kind of create some type of governing board that does monitor that? Because I know they have, like, here in San Antonio, you have ASA, and maybe ASA can create something like that that's independent. And I think STISA maybe needs to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Because I did see a lot of that, from, as far as coaches kind of getting a little out of line with the verbal abuse, and you try to kind of say something and you can't really do anything because no one else will take that further step to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And, maybe that's something that I guess for all the clubs to say, hey, talk to STISA about maybe having a independent governing board that does monitor this so we can start preventing a lot of this going on the field.
Yeah. And that's something I've discussed, like, with my board members. It's like, I feel like I can go to STISA and be like, what would this take? What does this look like? Because we use safe sport, but safe sport is not catching other things that are obviously harmful and traumatic for these kids. And these coaches need to either get completely retrained or just be removed from the sport. And when you're constantly just like, you're a repeat offender and you're club bouncing from club to club year after year, there's not a lot of catching that. And so that's something I want to go to STISA and, use like being a part of Surf almost, and go to Surf Nation, not just Surf San Antonio, but the Surf Nation as an organization. Like, we got to step up and do something about this. This can't be the story. Like, more and more kids, how many kids quit the sport? Why do they quit the sport? Because it's not fun anymore. And why is it not fun? Because their coach is a jerk. And like, I think always like the female side of it. Why is it that we have all these amazing female athletes and these, girls that grew up playing soccer, but then they leave the sport and they never come back? Like, why is it that I had so many great athletes and leaders that I played with, and I'm the only one that coaches still? And it's kind of like, we got to fix this system. Like, people are like, how do we get more women involved in soccer? How do we get more women coaches? How do we get more great women coaches candidates? I'm like, look, think about their experience as a kid. Like, was it Hubley that sent out about her experience in college? She almost quit the game. So that's like my kind of like project that I want to work on, and like go to higher levels, utilize Surf Nation, and kind of like, we need to push for this. This needs to change. And it only changes with accountability and system to track things like that.
Yeah, I've actually heard about coaches that are in the rush system that have been moved from rush entity from one city to another, right? From Denver to Atlanta or whatever, because they've had so many complaints about abuse and bullying on both the boys and girls side in one city, yet they're protected by the National Youth Club setup. I don't know if Surf operates this way also, Lori, but I've heard that story about coaches at Rush that they've just been then moved to other Rush towns. And so they keep recycling. And these coaches, I don't know why they're protected, but there's some ulterior motive. And I think it probably goes back to what we were saying earlier. There are, I don't want to say 3 or 4 major decision makers in the game in the country, but maybe 10. Maybe it's that few that effectively are creating a culture of submission and cover up with this. And now those people are on the back foot finally. And so we have to take this opportunity, I think, as you said, Lori, to bring in some monitoring, some sort of uniform monitoring of this and uniform reporting, because every league I've been involved in, we do have a process, but it's an informal process. And it's always a he said, she said thing. And generally, by the time we get around to litigating it at the league level, the coach that is impacted, the coach in question, has come up with some sort of alibi and gotten people to defend them, or some other players on their team to defend them against the player who's making the accusation. So We need a better system.
Yeah, and I think from that perspective, Kartik, you bring up that's kind of what I was referring to, really. I know Lori mentioned it right now as well with the gatekeepers, right? Those, let's just say 10, right? The heavy influencers, if anything else, right? And I think it's putting those names beyond the organizations, right? But putting those names, right, under the spotlight, under the magnifying glass, because it's, don't get me wrong, I think it's really easy in this situation to look at the end result of the abuse from the coach's perspective, and it can be, we can just look at coaches, and then, but those influencers that we're talking about, those 10 individuals, 12 individuals, what have you, kind of, they can just slap a, hey, we have to create a new mandatory state training that you have to go through for 2 hours, or you attend a course, and that's it. We're good. We responded to it somehow. And I think the reality of it is that can't be enough, right? That can't be enough. Those names have to be brought forward. All right. And the lack of transparency, like I said, and the fact that when you start, you look at an individual, whether we say someone like a Christian Labors at the ECNL, for example, I know it has been exposed about the involvement of different organizations that he has beyond just the ECNL. How can a director of this also be in charge of this or be connected to that? And he's just one example. But again, the soccer community in this country, it's also only so big.
And I think that's my frustration so far with what's happened here is it's almost like U.S. Soccer took the easy road out and got rid of the coaches. And I'm not saying they're ignoring the cover up, but outside of, hey, the coach is gone here, and this is part of the reason why I had Kartik on, is the media aspect and just drops the story as opposed to keep digging into, okay, the Christian Press, went to USSF. Who dropped the ball there? Why isn't there any accountability at the higher levels? Because without accountability at the higher levels, how can you expect things to change?
Right. Why did we just accept the explanation, and I include myself in this, from Jill Ellis I'm trying to remember the exact timeline of this press situation, because I mean, at the time it was kind of clear something strange was going on with her. She was being traded against her will. Her rights had been traded, as you guys know, in Texas. And she went to Sweden. There were other rumors that maybe she doesn't really want to play for the national team anymore. And there were all these kind of salacious things flying that I'm not going to get into on here. But why didn't we at that point see a red flag and dig deeper and say, wait a second, this is one of your top players. This is someone that everybody who's played with, all of her teammates, both national team and club level, think the world of her. And I actually, she played here her rookie year in South Florida for the previous league, the previous top division league. WPS had a team in Boca Raton. And so actually when I was the NASL PR director, we were working, we were doing some cross promotion with them. So I got to know Kristen Press her rookie season, and she was an obscure player at the time, right? Abby Wambach was on the team, Hope Solo was on the team, etc. But she always struck me as someone who was really earnest. So why, when she blew the whistle and went to U.S. Soccer, was there not any further digging? Why is it that we, for years, accepted explanations about various coaches, not just Dames and Riley, but others in addition to that? And I think a lot of us are feeling kind of used and bad about the situation now. But there are other journalists who I think have a vested interest in protecting U.S. Soccer and protecting NWSL. NWSL is kind of a cause for some of them, right? And now with USL breaking into the women's market, they might, or the women's pro market, right? Because they've had the W League in the past. There might be some journalists who don't want to do that much damage to NWSL because it's something they have a vested interest in. The last thing I'll say on this also is I think that there was such a a wow factor about the sponsors Lisa Baird was bringing in the last year at the NWSL level that everyone just kind of assumed that sponsors, because there have been rumors of this stuff for many years, not the specifics about individual players, but about coaches. Yeah, some of them have had reputations but we didn't know the extent of it. We didn't know nearly how deep it was. But there was an assumption that with all these corporate partners marrying themselves to NWSL, that there probably had been a vetting process. And, you know, there are rumors in every business, there are rumors in every field. And there's probably not this massive culture. However, I mean, where I would say I had been different than a lot of my colleagues in the soccer writer community is I knew that there were problems at the ECNL level, and that there were lots of issues of bullying and sexual harassment and just plain out abuse from coaches in under 15, under 17, under 19 girls at elite ECNL levels. So that now all adds up because it's a complete culture around the game, and a lot of those coaches, as you mentioned, Lori earlier, Rory Dames was the gatekeeper in the Chicago area to the youth clubs. Also, there is a cross. It's a very small circle, as we've talked about, as Hector talked about. There is a cross kind of pollination of these coaches. So the coaches at the ECNL level end up at the pro level, and vice versa, all the time.
So you moving on kind of the final topic here, and I'll start with you, Lori. As a parent, for parents, and you know, as somebody that's involved, you know, with the academies and you know, especially high schools that are here, what things do you think that we can do as parents to try to help shape a system going forward, you know, where there's a little bit more accountability, whether it's, you know, at the club level, high schools, you know, kind of at that grassroots level to protect the younger kids, you know, there, so where maybe they can get to that high school level or, you know, college level, you know, from there with the least impact here. So what are, you know, your thoughts as a parent? You know, what are some things that we can do to maybe kind of help avoid this situation, you know, for our kids?
I think if your kid comes to you and brings up a thing that their coach has said to them, or I don't feel like I can do anything good for this coach, I constantly feel like I can't do anything right, I'm scared to make mistakes, you can't like brush that off and be like, oh, you just gotta toughen up. Like you'll make it through, just toughen up, you know? And like, I kind of remember that kind of happening to me sometimes. It's like, you toughen up a little bit, because my parents grew up in a different era where that's coaching, you know? And yeah, I mean, even coaches in my office, we were kind of talking about today, and it's like, yeah, that's just coaching in a way. But then we kind of talked about what the difference is. What's the intent? Is there an intent to control that player and manipulate that player? And is that coach asking questions that they really shouldn't ask? Like if a coach is asking your player about their personal life, who are you dating? Who are you talking to? What are you interested in? Stuff that's beyond like just normal day-to-day checking in, like, hey, how's your day been? How are you doing? Like, how's school going for you? There's stuff that as a coach, I don't need to know about my players necessarily. And I shouldn't be the one that like is looking for that information. So like if my kid came up to me or if a kid comes up to me and is telling me, you know, this coach is asking me some kind of personal stuff, or coach is like bringing up like, well, if my boyfriend's coming to my game, it's like, well, you better play good for your boyfriend. Like, or if you mess up, like I'm going to pull you out of that game. And there's stuff there that you have to watch out for, and let your kid know, like you hear them and you understand what they're saying, and then go speak to those adults in charge. Like go speak to the, sorry, my husband's here. Go speak to the adults, follow the chain of command. So if it's like you're a JV player, talk to the head coach, go to the athletic director, you know, if it's a coordinator on site for you, and get those people and say, hey, these are the things that are being said to my kid. That's more the high school level, kind of in the system I'm in. Like at the youth levels, I really think there has to be a system for parents to report as well. It can't just be if a coach is observed being very verbally abusive to players, it can't just be the organization self-reporting that. It has to be parents being able to put into that system and be able to make reports. I'm sure parents film games all the time, but there's probably stuff that's going to be on film somewhere. So I think when your kid comes to you and says something, listen, maybe try to observe, don't brush it off. Because to me, if a kid comes and voices that concern, you need to hear that concern.
Your thoughts, Coach Connor? I know you've got a young daughter as well.
Yeah, I think I'm listening to Lori and I'm thinking that's precisely I'm thinking that's a system, that's a policy, that's a implemental policy in place, a procedure, right? But I guess if we were collectively to poll at all levels of the game, right, whether it's rec clubs, your competitive clubs, whatever, right? You insert the name of a league, at the club soccer level, at the youth soccer level, high school, even college, where if we were to poll these organizations independently, what percentage would say they have a reporting system and training procedures in place to be able to, one, identify it and know who to report it to, right? I mean, I would guess it would be shockingly low.
Your thoughts, Rafa?
Just to kind of piggyback on Coach Connor, don't see any systems, all that. Being coaching in club and high school, there really isn't a way, and there's a lot of that is pushed under the rug because that certain coach has won a bunch of games or this and that. We don't want to ruin their reputation and stuff, but still, your focus as those players is the safety of the players, not only physically but also mentally too, because you can imagine what some of these players have gone through, and like I say, there's they could have gone to do extreme things, maybe could have led to suicide or stuff like that, and because of that, they're still haunted by that pressure or that the thing wasn't resolved and so forth. So I think overall we do need to look into adding those systems and having accountability and finding the ways working together as a community, and with the parents and also with the coaches, holding that accountability and having those rounds of open communication, because it's only going to make things a lot better if we have that. We can't be sweeping under the rug all the time, and sooner or later, we may not have players to be out there to play the coach, and then also it kind of gives a bad rep to the actual good coaches out there who are actually doing the good job and helping those players, compete and so forth. And, then it may end up not being able to coach anybody, period, because those players are not staying with the sport. So hopefully that's something I want to see in the future. And, from the pros all the way to the club teams, even the high school teams, we got to start having some accountability going forward after all this.
And Kartik, I'm going to ask yours a little bit different here. What would you like to see from the federation? What would you like to see the federation lead on this as? Because we've got 50 different states, and then it's broken down to many different club levels and stuff under there. But for you, if you were to kind of pick one or two things that the federation could do, what would that be?
So first off, for the entities they govern that have that are huge youth soccer factories, ECNL, U.S. Club Soccer, U.S. Youth Soccer, also now MLS Next. Obviously, we have to throw into that. They need to set clear guidelines. I mean, we talk. Harry, you and I even have this conversation on Twitter like once a week, it feels like, about the pro league standards, right? So
Yes.
why have they set standards for professional leagues about ownership and net worth, but they're not even willing to do the basics about player safety, even to deal with concussions as a serious issue? It took them forever and so much pulling of the teeth. I mean, that was something that I personally had gotten involved in 2008 or 2009, and the USSF really didn't want to deal with it until 6-7 years later. And they started to take steps about heading the ball at a certain age. And but it took several years. They need to set clear guidelines for coaches and their interactions with players, their interactions with parents. Now, it doesn't have to be really regimented, but there have to be clear protections for the players and for parents. And then you need to go and do the same thing at the college level. I don't know to what extent that, because of the NCAA, that's a whole nother issue. Then at the professional level with NWSL, they have some significant responsibility. They may even have had a fiduciary duty, particularly in the Paul Riley case, which they dropped the ball on. So we know they brought Sally Yates in. Is that going to be just sweeping things under the rug, or are they going to get an actual audit out of that? I don't know, because even when I look at NWSL as an entity, I think so many of the decisions that NWSL made regarding this seem to have been tied back to their association with the federation and legal counsels that both entities shared, outside firms that both entities shared. Let's remember, U.S. Soccer was managing the operations of NWSL during this period. So it's the NWSL question is a lot more complicated. How do they unwind themselves from that and become an actual objective governing body when, in fact, they're actually a party to this thing? So they can't actually objectively govern and separate the sides and set standards to protect players and protect the integrity. And we're talking about the entire integrity of the sport, because I think as this abuse scandal continues to unfold, what's going to happen is it's going to hurt the popularity of soccer as a participatory sport in this country. And once that happens, then everything else starts to fall.
So final thoughts here. Like I said here, we'll start with you, Rafa. I think it's been a great conversation. From everybody. It's been real educational for me, which is hopefully what everybody gets out of this podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube. Rafa, kind of your final thoughts, and if you were in charge, what's one thing that you would implement?
I think for me, it's just accountability, having somebody independently monitor this, making sure, that type of abuse is not happening, and, your players are important, and, their feelings are important. And I think for me, from the coaching, I've coached, like I said, both high school and club, seeing other coaches kind of do what they did, it's just not, it didn't work for me in my system. Like, I have a system that, encourages players and all that. So I think being, part of the committee or the board, it's finding people that are going to make sure that player safety comes first, making sure there's no verbal abuse, sexual abuse, anything like that. And that we have all eyes, ears, and opens ready to go. And also to deal with those matters and not just put them under the rug, and keep the right people that need to be in part of that organization that's going to make the organization more successful and help the sport grow too. So I think that's what I would do if I was in that position. And I think hopefully, this opens the eyes to many others to, we do need to band together and create, kind of not saying like a watchdog thing, but, kind of watch each other to make sure that we take care of our players first. And like I said, they do come first before anything.
Coach Kano, your final thoughts, and if you were in charge, what's the one thing you would like to see implemented?
Yeah, I think obviously it's a very, very broad question. We could have a separate, episode just on that. But yeah, I think to begin with, a clear shift in terms, because as we clearly mentioned, no one is safe in this. We're finding from the lowest levels in youth soccer all the way to professionals, emphasizing what has to be important to be able to, what I view as one of the greatest privileges I have in my life is to be able to wear the title of coach, right? Is it's got to be more than just to simply call yourself a coach, obviously. And there has to be, when I say shift the emphasis, maybe a little bit less of an emphasis on, hey, what badges do you have? What licenses do you have? What courses have you gone to? That is not enough, right? It's not enough, right? And the shift to character, right? Development. What are our clubs? What are our high schools? Our college coaches, all the way on up. Sometimes you see the mission and the vision statements and the core values, and it looks great on the website. But how much of it is being implemented daily across the board from our executive directors, our DOCs, all the way on down, right? So I think probably a step back, and and I think some of it too is, I don't know if at no point is this acceptable, but did some people along the way just kind of talk themselves into thinking that some of this was just the norm, or hey, you're being soft because it's about results versus, it's about results versus development, right? And because the money that's involved, and because, again, back to those gatekeepers, there's a handful, right, that can really make, if they all collectively stepped up and said, hey, not anymore, right? Not on my watch. This would change. This could change. So I think a shift in principles, a shift in priorities, and not a matter of just, hey, how quickly can you develop and how many different courses can you attend and work your way up the ladder as quickly as possible.
Kartik, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think everything everyone's hit on tonight is great. And I think the key thing, one of the key things I want to stress is, in the future, when we hear a coach say to us, and especially to me in administration or in journalism, a player is soft, a player is not mentally tough. Now, anytime that is said, we now have to question the coach, because I'll admit I was one who would accept that. I mean, I don't know. I could, dozens of coaches have come to me and named individual players as being soft. Players you guys know, players who played for San Antonio FC, actually a few of them, coaches that come to me, oh, that guy is soft, that guy's not mentally strong. And some of the things that I found out subsequently were, well, they just had a run-in with the coach, or the coach was trying to assert some degree of dominance over that particular player. So this happens on the men's side also. And on the women's side, it's even more rampant. So that, to me, is in addition to everything you guys have said and all the suggestions you've made, that we question when we're told in the future a player is not mentally tough or a player is soft, because that now seems to be code for a coach trying to assert their dominance over that player.
Coach Lee, your final thoughts and what you would like to see implemented, whether it's from being part of the board, coach, or as a parent.
I think something that the NWSL Players Association brought up is the importance of independence with these investigations. So I definitely think there has to be some sort of way to get an independent board that parents and players can report coaches to. So this like lemon shuffle of coaches from one city or one club to the other stops. Because to me, that's the biggest problem, is that these coaches are unable to continue their behaviors because there's a lack of independent investigations, or there's just no investigations at all. Let's just move them on along. And I think a lot of coaches, like I've taken a lot of self-reflection of this and kind of thinking about, okay, what am I doing? How do I speak to my players? A lot of the coaches that I work with are older and they've been coaching for a long time. And it's, well, we can't just yell at players anymore. And it's changing the thought of like, no, it's not the yelling thing. That's not, nobody's talking about that. We're talking about the power dynamics here and the need to assert power over somebody and control them and manipulate and coerce them. And like as a parent and just as somebody who, like as a coach, like my ultimate goal as a coach for my players is to keep them a part of the game. So like when my players graduate high school, some of them are gonna go play college, some of them are not. How do they stay a part of this game? Or, do they go on and coach themselves? Do they referee? Do they volunteer coach youth soccer at the Y? Like keep them involved. They're just fans and they want to be a part, and they go to games and they're fans on social media and they watch on TV. You want to keep players part of this game, and keeping them part of this game is because it's enjoyable and it's fun, and they don't have this trauma to process and deal with and feel like a core part of them is taken away because of something that happened to them and something that a coach did to them.
And my final thought, and I'm going to point the finger at myself as a parent, and it kind of goes to what Kartik said here is, I know, just with AJ, and I've gotten better just with the communication between him and me on what works and what doesn't work for him. But as parents, we also play a role in what's accepted by the children and what's not. I know early when AJ, was starting, with rec and club, I was probably harder than I should have been, on it, saying, hey, you needed to do this, you need to do this. And I look back at it now, and it's one of those where, I wasn't meaning to be abusive, but from his side, it wasn't about, hey, you did a great job at the game. It was, my first reaction was, hey, this is what you could have done better. So I think as parents, we need to work with the coaches in regards to this. We need to work with, the administrations, with the club. Like, I know, some, part of it's through this podcast, part of it's through just interaction with them on social media. Get to know the administrators of the club, get to know the administrators, whether it's, schools, the coaches and stuff along those lines, but work together as a team to try to be able to help nurture in not only your kids, but, their kids and their friends and their teammates here. So it's going to take, in order to stop this, it's going to take everybody, from parents to listening to the kids, to the schools, to, the academy structure, all the way up to the top here. But I do want to thank everybody for coming on. Kartik, thank you for coming on. Like I said here, I've talked to you for years, not topics here. So thank you for coming on. Coach Lee, thank you for reaching out to me and saying, hey, this is what you wanted to talk about. Hopefully we will get you on later on in the year to talk a little bit about, high school soccer, Harlan and others in the area here. And of course, Coach Kano, you're always welcome on. And I'm assuming when playoffs come, we'll be doing those marathon shows for that here.
Yeah, let's see if we can beat that 3-hour bracketology episode from last year. That was awesome.
Hey, it was fun.
Always, guys. I appreciate you all having me on, but more importantly, I think to be able to be part of this discussion, this panel, because this is, all kidding aside, a very, very serious topic that's kind of at the heart of the future of this game in this country. So, and I think it's more of these conversations need to happen, more poking, more prodding, more, hey, enough statements and questions need to happen. So thank you.
Yeah, I think this conversation, like I have it in my office, and it's kind of those conversations that you are going to come up, and they're tough conversations. But I think all of us, I honestly believe the best in everybody, that everybody wants to do the best for their kids. Mm-hmm. And kids are different now, and we got to adjust a little bit for that.
Unfortunately.
I know.
I've got twin 13-year-olds, and let me tell you, the reason why I cut my hair is it was turning grayer faster than it was.
I have a 3-year-old who is going to give me a run for my money. She's like me, just in little form right now. So she's very opinionated, very strong-willed, very independent, and it's going to be fun with her.
Harry, you get zero sympathy regarding hair from me. Okay, so I don't want to hear it.
So no, AJ's like, Dad, you need to cut your hair. I want to cut it. I was like, well, when the season's over, and not thinking that the season was going to be over a couple of weeks ago, and then I cut it off, and he's like, Dad, you need to grow your hair back. And I was like, well, I cut it for you. But thank you for everybody for tuning in. Like I said here, CJ, I'll answer your question here about the USL Championships. It is part of a video game. I forget the name of it. It's not the FIFA one. It's one that's
Konami.
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 It used to be PES, and I think they rebranded. I think I forget which one it is. It isn't supposed to be out yet. It's supposed to be for start of next year. If you actually check with Edson Ochoa, he has a lot. He plays video games a little bit more. So, from my understanding, it's good that it's in there, but it's not the best game, at this point. eFootball, yes, Jonathan, thank you. eFootball is the game that's going to be coming on, but it's supposed to be for next year, 2022. Just to kind of wrap up, next week we'll be getting back into the high school soccer. Rafa, we're getting ready to bring out the Rafa rankings yet.
Yeah, they're gonna be. We got some power rankings hopefully soon, and it's a new format. We're gonna have one for the boys, one for the girls. So it's not gonna be long, and it takes 3 hours long.
No Coach Kano influence here. Let's we got to be tough on him.
But we also have the other power rankings too for the statewide too with Coach Kano too. But I'm pulling double duty, so it should be fun, and hopefully, like I said, we do get to talk to coaches with the both shows, and just looking forward to this season. It's a lot of excitement, a lot of uncertainty. We don't know who the favorites are just yet, and you might be seeing me popping by some scrimmages to see what your teams have, and reporting back, and hopefully, like I said, start of the season. I know there's some good matchups, so we'll discuss those.
We'll start addressing that, and
yeah.
I plan on since I'm vaccinated, I plan on attending more games this year as well here. So. It's always interesting to watch the high school here, and I do have to get to the south side. That's my goal this year, is to go and watch one on the south side, because that's one where I think we neglect a little bit on the show here. So
hopefully we also get to live stream a couple games. So that's
something that we're going to work on here for that here. But do want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you to Lori, Rafa, Hector, and Kartik. What's life without goals? We're out of here. Peace.